we both have Tyree Wilson at number 5. Is that correct?
Yep.
Tyree Wilson, who is projected to go in the top 10. Mm-hmm. Everyone else seems to have him as their 1 or 2, and we both have him at 5.
And I got to be honest.
Why are you being contrarian, Sam?
I was expecting to have him ranked lower than this. I told you what I did for sort of methodology of ranking these guys. So I specifically left Tyree Wilson to quite late in the process. I was effectively going through more or less in order of like a consensus board ranking and watching them in that kind of order, and then ordering them as I went. And I specifically left Tyree Wilson to later because I wanted to look at the bunch of guys that were in tier 2, tier 3, before I figured out where he was being slotted. Because I'm like, the only thing I'm really confident in right now is that Tyree Wilson belongs nowhere near Will Anderson. Like, they are dramatically different in terms of ability right now. So I was expecting to have Wilson ranked pretty low, but it didn't take long before I was like, okay, as much as I don't love him, he's better than this next guy, you know? And so I ended up slotting him at 5, and I'm like, I can't really put him lower than that, as much as I might not love. So the point being, you get pretty quickly in this draft to the point where I don't love taking an edge rusher. Like, if I'm a team that needs an edge rusher and I'm sitting, say, low in the first round, and let's say Anderson, Nolan Smith, Miles Murphy, and in my case, Will McDonald are gone, I don't love it. Like, I'm scared by Tyree Wilson, yet I might end up taking him just because I'm scared more of the other guys.
I think that's fair. I've gone back and watched Tyree Wilson multiple times on film just to make sure I'm getting the full picture here. He is definitely one of those guys where I get it on film. And again, was just talking to Renner upstairs. I said, like, I can like Tyree Wilson on film, especially his last season. Bend, dip, length, burst, tackle radius, love all that stuff. But he did it in his age 23 season. It was one breakout season that, to me, you don't have to take that in the top 10. That's my point that I think you're making as well. When I look at Tyree Wilson, I'm like, great. Here's still a project with tons of tools that I would take in the 20s. Maybe. I mean, if I was just stacking a vertical board, I'd put him in the 20s probably. Whereas, my theory, I've got data that just says I probably would just let someone else take that chance. And it might pay off for them, but I would let someone else take that chance. I can go through that data really quick in a minute, but there's things to like about Tyree Wilson. But much like Trayvon Walker last year, I think it's a very similar situation where depending on which years you look at, and I'm looking at all of them, the production profile does not match any other first rounder. Just doesn't.
Right.
And that's risky to me. And if you're just saying, like, the fact that his arms are 35 plus versus, someone else's 33-inch arms, like, that's not enough to say, oh, he's going from pick 25 to pick 8. That's not enough for me. And I feel like that's what the move is.
Yeah. Every time I watch his tape, he reminds me of somebody, and I can't really put my finger on who it is. This is not the player that he's reminding me of, but...
Manny Lawson?
No. But he did remind me a little bit of like a lankier version of Ray Edwards. Remember him, the old Vikings defensive end?
Yeah, I don't remember Ray Edwards stylistically.
It's like, I think he's going to win in the NFL. Like, I think he's going to get pressure and production. I'm just not sure he's going to win decisively. And like Ray Edwards was one of those guys. The Vikings had a few of these actually for a while where they had players that would get a lot of pressure, but not necessarily sacks. Ray Edwards was one. Brian Robinson was another for different reasons. I wonder if Wilson is going to end up being that guy. Like, I know actually his sack rate has been really good so far, but when you look at where he struggles, like you got power, he's got a lot of straight line bursts, like linear. He's going to power through some people, but it almost feels like the more space he's in, the worse he is.
Yeah,
and he seems to like. There's definitely some change of direction ability sometimes. Like he's got a really good. So we use. Lateral agility, I think, gets termed as sort of one all-encompassing thing. You either have lateral agility or you don't, and it's a yes or no thing. But actually, I think there's two different ways of having that. Do you have that, like, hard lateral step, like foot in the ground, one step, essentially a cut? Can you cut in a short space laterally? Or can you run that arc? Can you turn tightly? Can you turn the corner tightly in that kind of bend? And I think he's good at the first one and bad at the second one. So there's some times where his turning circle looks like a barge. It's like, this is just not going to happen. But he's able to put a foot in the ground, just sidestep a guy pretty quickly. He's an interesting prospect, actually. I don't hate him, but he's very unusual. Like, this is not a normal profile.
There's so many yeah buts in there with this is good, yeah, but this is bad, yeah, but, right? And it goes both ways. I want to try to paint both sides of the story as quickly as possible. I looked through my numbers historically. Here are the first round prospects that are guys who were drafted in the first round as edge defenders that were below, just say, the 55th percentile. I use that as an arbitrary cutoff because it got some interesting players in there. Here are the guys that are that low. Eric Armstead, who turned into quite the hit. And we only had 1 year of data on him, so a little asterisk next to that. Charles Harris was a miss by the Dolphins. Gregory Rousseau, and I think he's only low from a percentile standpoint because he opted out of his last year at Miami. Had he played, I think he would have been fine. But he's a miss by my model. He's become a very good player and a similar player to Tyree Wilson, super long and all that stuff, right? The other two are Joe Tryon-Shoyinka from the Bucs and then Trayvon Walker last year for the Jags. So the hit rate's kind of hit or miss. If you want to say Eric Armstead and Gregory Rousseau, they hit. The other five, Walker hasn't yet. Tryon-Shoyinka has not yet. Charles Harris did not. So it's like, let's say it's 2 for 5, 40%. That's just one way of looking at it. But then when I look at where Tyree Wilson's actual percentile is like actually in the 20s, there's no comparable as far as guys at that production level other than Eric Armstead. The miss rate and for that level of player from a model standpoint in all rounds, the hit rate is like 7%. That's rough for me. On the other hand, again, how do you manipulate that? You can use data to tell whatever story you want. I trust this data the most because it's the most data. As you start to parse it down a little bit and you say, well, what if we just took last year for Tyree Wilson? Of course, things look a lot better. Is that what he is? He's a much better pass rusher. You could look at last year and say he was as good of a pass rusher as Will Anderson last year, or close. That's why people might have him ranked higher. The other thing is I looked at all of the players who did improve their pass rush production from college to the NFL. I mentioned this on the show yesterday. And it matches up intuitively. It is good athletes overall who improve, right? It is guys who have a good 40, a good 3-cone, a good shuttle, and usually some length to them. So does Tyree Wilson profile as an upside type of player? Yes. Yes, he does. But he also profiles as someone where the hit rate is so low that I think it's extremely risky in the first round. So for me, that puts him at 5 on my rankings. All of that stuff added up puts him at 5. I'm not being contrarian. I'm not being a hater and all that stuff. I just don't want to be the guy to take Tyree Wilson in the top 10 to 15 picks. I'd be much more comfortable taking him where we did in the mock draft the other day with the Jags. Grabbed him in the 20s. Yeah,
he's probably the first of the players in this sort of group where I would be very, very leery about drafting him. I'm reasonably confident about the next guys, and I think there's enough upside with Tyree Wilson, particularly relative to the guys that are following, that I'm willing to roll the dice. But the meshing of where I'm willing to roll the dice and where I think the NFL values him or where he's sounding like he's going to get drafted might mean that if I was a GM, it's not a natural crossover. I'm not going to be in the market for Tyree Wilson.
Yeah, that's
Unless
pretty
he
much.
Slips,
Yeah, that's pretty much how I feel. I mean, I texted you yesterday. I said, "Is he just Charles Omenihu? What is Charles Omenihu? He's a guy that has not been great against the run, but when you throw him onto a defensive line like the 49ers last year, we have all these other pieces, and then it's like, oh, he could play. He could rush from the interior. He could rush from the edge, and it's just giving the offense a different look. This is a different body type. You have to. Drake Jackson's got burst, and Nick Bosa's just unbelievable. And oh, by the way, you get this super long, tough guy to block.
Yep.
I think Tyree Wilson's a good piece like that. I don't know if he's a future star. On top of all that, his breakout season did come at age 23. So that's what we saw last year.